Are you ready to do this?
I think so. What do we do?
Just get up on the podium and stand in the center.
What's the button for?
It's for...
Now you're probably wondering how I got myself into this situation, and you're also probably even more surprised to see that the man behind this untimely demise wasn't Sigma SP. And trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are. But to explain that, we need to first head back to the beginning of this fateful story. It all started with our departure from Asharia and the start of Project OSSI. Asharia was a terrifying land of powerful everything that would kill anything on sight, and because of that, we spent most of our time separated from each other living behind walls, and sometimes that still wasn't even good enough. Then we jumped into the new world. It looked like it was going to be a completely different story. This new land was peaceful, minus the occasional tornado that picked you up and threw you around like an empty sack of potatoes, and for the first time in Netherbound history, we all got together and built our own server-wide community, marking the end of Asharia and the end of the Age of Chaos. But this new peace didn't last long. Things quickly changed when Sigma and Peaches discovered that in this world, we were capable of space travel, and that there were all sorts of different planets for us to discover. And it wasn't long after that that a few of us gave in to our inner competitiveness and let it take over. Each planet and moon could only have a flag planted on them for the first time once, and each of us wanted to be the one that did it, which brought in the era known as Project OSSI. My plan for winning the space race had a very rocky start. Peaches and Sigma forged an unlikely and surprising alliance, bringing themselves the very first victory of the space race. They made it not only to the moon, but they also built the first space station orbiting the overworld before anyone else was even close to assembling the first pieces of their first rocket. But instead of letting them have this victory all to themselves, I did what any sane and mentally stable person would do in this situation. I quickly and effortlessly fabricated a lie, claiming I had already been there before them, but I just didn't have the proof at this time to show them. Because, space is weird with transmitting data and whatnot. Look, it wasn't the perfect lie, but that was future Spencer's problem. I knew that it would take some time for me to catch up to them, and in that time, they would also be the first to explore a few more planets in the process. I may not have beat them to the first planet, but nobody ever really remembers the past winners, right? All that matters is who wins something last. The final planet was the only victory that mattered. Whoever got to that first would also be the last person to ever win anything in the space race, and I wanted to be that guy. So my space race plan kicked into action, and starting off, I needed a lot of resources. Because listening in on Peaches and Sigma, I knew that space travel was a grind and that a colossal amount of resources were needed if anyone wanted to maintain any sort of momentum while they progressed through different planets and tiers of rockets. I also knew that as soon as I started to catch up, that was when they would start to push harder too. So I needed to make sure that I had the momentum to carry me past them, and once there, continue to stay ahead. And for all this to work, it just so happened that I was working on the perfect mod. Through immersive engineering, the foundations of my victory were built. I took soil samples from the ground to determine which chunks were ripe with different resources so that I could build large excavators on them that when powered would run non-stop, bringing in tens of thousands of resources over a couple of days without me needing to physically do anything or even be there. Once running, this would net me with a seemingly infinite supply of resources. However, these excavators were power hungry. I currently produce enough power to run a single excavator, but only at about 70% efficiency. And while it was running, nothing else in my base had any power. For this plan to work, I needed to keep 13 different excavators running at any given time, as well as keep the rest of my base powered. And the most scalable way for me to do this was with biodiesel generators. But I didn't quite have the farming output to maintain something of the scale needed. So I enlisted the help of Casper, our resident farmer. I supplied the technology and initial power to start it all up, and she housed and maintained the automated farms on her land. At the height of us working together, we were producing thousands of potatoes every minute that were shipped across the server using the Great Potato Pipeline, where they were then processed along with hemp seeds into biodiesel, the liquid gold of this entire operation. Now with the power flowing in, I was able to start all 13 excavators with enough power to spare that later down the road, I could also maintain several industrial smelters that ended up being the cornerstone and turning point of my resource manufacturing. But it was still going to be some time until I had the rest of my infrastructure installed and set up to be able to keep up with the demands of the space race. But that wasn't all a bad thing. While waiting for resources to process, it gave me lots of time to design and build the greatest moon film set that Neverbound had ever seen. And it also happened to be where I filmed my fake moon landing. With this, I hoped that I could crush Sigma and Peach's morale by convincing them that I actually made it to the moon first before them, but it backfired completely. Sigma just outright didn't believe me, and Peaches believed me so well, he wanted to come visit my moon base. So again, I did what any sane and emotionally intelligent person would do. I doubled down and fabricated another lie on top of the previous one, telling him it was all real and I would love to bring him there to visit. And now I needed to build an even bigger, more advanced set so that I could walk him around on it. But again, this was another future Spencer's problem. During this time, Sigma SP and OP Peaches continued making progress in the space race. For an outsider looking in on the space race, it probably seemed like Sigma and Peaches were a shoo-in for victory. I had yet to publicly build a launch pad or rocket, and they were already a third of the way through the space race with no hint of slowing down. But there's two more things we need to talk about before I can reveal my perfectly diabolical plan for winning the space race. And it's also where we begin to see the first signs of Peaches falling into the role that you saw at the very beginning of this video. If only I'd noticed it sooner. Around this time, Sigma began to dabble with a form of science known as DNA splice. He began taking DNA from different mobs and animals and combining it with himself. And the more he continued, the more obsessed he became with it. A few times he even stopped by to try and convince me to let him modify my own DNA. At the time, I thought it was nothing more than a creepy, uncomfortable hobby of his. But what you'll see later on in this video is I didn't realize exactly what was going on until it was too late. The other thing I got up to while this was all going on was I started hitting Peaches and Sigma with a little bit of sabotage. I started by creating an environmental agency under the name Jeff Bezos called the Overworld Conservancy. The first documentary it produced was designed to shut down Sigma and Peaches' power production within the Nether. But that backfired because Peaches then started work on his windmill farm. They basically now had stupid infinite wind energy. While this was going on, I also physically sabotaged Sigma's base by filling his inventory storage system with all of my excess blocks that were starting to clog up my own inventory. I was hoping that the two types of sabotage together would slow him down a fair amount, as well as surprise them with the fact that I had actually been secretly progressing in the space race this entire time, and that I was hot on their heels. This also ended up sparking a long couple weeks of sabotage back and forth between all parties involved. I filled their inventory system with more blocks, they filled my system back up with their own. I built a program that renamed paper with a different number at the end of each one so that they wouldn't be able to auto-filter all the paper out of their system. They then filled my system with an infinite cobblestone generator, which I then used back against them to infinitely fill all of the open spaces surrounding their bases. It was a fun time. But this is also where I made two huge mistakes. While this was all going on, I hadn't yet realized to what extent the DNA splicing was affecting Sigma. And the more he turned himself into what he claimed was the perfect person, the more he also seemed to lose his sanity. This entire time, the DNA splicing had been changing him. Working with him personally, I think Peaches was the first to notice these changes, and because I had distracted myself with the ongoing sabotage war, I also didn't realize that during this time, Peaches had been slowly building up his own production and resources separately from Sigma. During one of the final sabotage attempts from them, they even broke into the lower levels of my base to discover my film sets. So there went all my work convincing them I was actually the first one into space. And while they were there, they also messed up a bunch of my auto crafting. But worst of all, this entire time, I thought I'd been competing against Sigma and Peaches. But I'd been competing mostly with Peaches. Sigma started losing interest in the space race after the third or fourth planet, and pretty much everything after that was mostly Peaches' work. Up until this point, I always thought it was me versus Sigma's team, and Peaches, craftily enough, never once corrected me on it. I can't count the amount of times I tried to convert and steal Peaches over to my team. I tried bribing him, adopting him through legal documents. I even tried showing him how impressive my automation was. Everything I could think of, but not once did he ever agree to it. He just left things open enough that it seemed that there was a possibility I could convince him. The crafty bugger. By the time I realized how much of the space race was actually him, he had already built at the time what seemed to be an impenetrable fortress underneath his floating islands. And unknowingly to me, he had also already started moving all of his gear and technology to another location that still even now, I have no idea where it is. During the final days of the sabotage war, I started to see how much Sigma had changed and how volatile this new DNA splice Sigma had become. I pushed forward on my plans for a brand new space station. I also began preparing ways to kill Sigma, just in case, I ever needed to use them. Also, maybe because I wanted to prove my own authority and dominance. Inevitably, nothing worked. Even with 40 different turrets that would each instantly kill a regular person with a single bullet that were all firing at him repeatedly, could do no harm. With that loss, I retired to my new space station and doubled down on the space race. I spent a lot of time experimenting with new ways to collect and process resources from the new planets, and with that, was able to push on to bigger and greater heights. But there was one major hiccup that almost brought this all tumbling down. A method of travel we'd been using for some time now in the server, and this was all thanks to Peach's discovery, were stargates. These devices were capable of dialing into any other stargate, linking two locations of any distance and any dimension together in the matter of seconds. And the stargate I had constructed in my space base, I accidentally left open one night, and Sigma made his way in and built a second stargate located some distance away from my base, and used that to come and go from my space station whenever he desired. It wasn't until later on when by chance Peaches thought Sigma had been stealing his resources, and he revealed the stargate's location to me. I quickly destroyed it, updated the security features of my own stargate, and continued on with my work. But what I didn't realize, till much later on, was that Sigma had never left my space station. So with destroying the stargate and locking off access to my own, he was stuck up there with me, living in the shadows. The next few weeks of the server, not much else went on besides progressing in the the space race. Peaches and myself continued to grind through resources and planets, each hoping we'd be the one to overtake the other with the final planet. But the final planet came much sooner than we expected. I had finally finished my Tier 10 rocket, and with its completion, I was about to land on Kepler 22b, the first planet unlockable by the Tier 10 rocket. And after that, we were getting into the red question mark planets, the planets that we were truly excited for, because many of them were themed after things from other universes that we loved, like Star Wars. But landing upon Kepler 22b, I was in for a rude awakening. I landed, planted my flag, and looked around to discover that sure, it was the first breathable planet we'd been to, but there were also no more dungeons and no more blueprints to discover. The red question mark planets were not yet implemented. They didn't even exist. So I had won. This space race had come to an end. I mean, it was exciting, don't get me wrong, but not the winning victory I'd expected. We could all feel that the next jump was coming, that in a few weeks, we'd all be leaving Project OSSI behind to go and explore a brand new world. So we were excited to see how many more planets we could reach first before it happened. But this was it. In the end, it wasn't all completely bad. Peaches was really close behind and arrived on Kepler 22b the next day, and we began to relax. For the last few months, we'd spent our time stressing about the space race and who'd made it further and what we all still needed to do. But now we got to relax on a brand new oxygen-breathable planet and take a bit of a break, almost like a little vacation. I started to write a book and even learned how to play the piano. It was a nice change of pace, as well as I got to reminisce a little bit about the things that we'd done on the server so far. In the end, I was never able to find a way to kill Sigma. But before I built my house on Kepler, I did strip all of my equipment and remove the stargates from my space base while Sigma was sleeping. While I'm not 100% positive, I'm sure Sigma spent the rest of the days on the server wandering around the abandoned space station with nothing to do. Casper stayed on the overworld as she expanded her farm. We all kind of forgot to tell her about what was going on, so she probably had no idea where even most of us were. But I mean, Godril was still around, although Casper probably didn't make any more sales on her food stalls, because Godril had been combining himself with technology for some time now, and by now I doubt he even had any need to eat anything. I also hadn't seen Melty in a while, although she was probably trying to figure out how she could reunite herself with the interdimensional traveling burrito. That's another story for another day. And then just moments ago, Peaches showed up at my window.
Spin!
Peaches?
Come outside, quick!
What are you
Look at
doing?
this.
It turns out someone else had landed down on the planet with us. It wasn't just the two of us anymore.
This is amazing.
What is all
The man
this?
put all this together.
He'd also arrived, one of the first companions we met at the start of the server. This was a nice start and a fitting end to Project OSSI, or so I thought.
Are you ready to do this?
I think so. What do we do?
Just get up on the podium and stand in the center.
Oh, this is so cool. What's the button for?
It's for...
Wait, no, Peaches! Peaches! Peaches!
Oh no! Spin! He's dead!
Peaches had sabotaged the podium. I was in vacation mode and I let my guard down. I also blamed the lack of sleep because for some reason all beds instantly explode when you try to sleep on them here, so we've been awake for a few weeks straight. And because of that, I couldn't set my spawn on my bed, so when I did respawn, it was 600 blocks away from the cottage.
Oh no! Spin! He left me his will. Oh, I will read it now. Dear OP Peaches, since I've totally died, I leave you with all my base rockets and resources. I also leave you with my first
Peaches!
trophy of the Project
Peaches,
OSSI
you
space
son of a
race.
gun!
You are the rightful winner of
How
the
dare
space
you!
race.
I'm gonna get you, Peaches!